There is something about mental illness that's far more frightening than any other illness to me. A person can be completely healthy on the outside, but damaged beyond repair on the inside, most of the times due to past trauma in that person's life, that lingers on their mind and shapes their personality. There are several ways in which mental illness can show its ugly claws, most commonly through depression, which can, in and of itself, be a dangerous and life-threatening condition. But there is another mental illness that impacts the body in a far more noticeable and disturbing fashion, and if not controlled, will most certainly kill you. An illness that enslaves your mind, distorting the way you perceive yourself while being very hard to overcome and to truly recover from, leaving marks on your body that can be felt years after you recovered from it. That illness is anorexia. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder characterized by low weight, food restriction, body image disturbance, fear of gaining weight, and an overpowering desire to be thin. According to the United Kingdom's NHS, a person who suffers from anorexia can be categorized by your weight and height being lower than expected for your age if you're a minor, having an unusually low body mass index if you're an adult, missing meals, eating very little, avoiding eating any foods you see as fattening, believing you're fat when you're a healthy weight or underweight, taking medicine to reduce your hunger, having your period stop altogether if you're a grown woman, or not starting at all if you're a younger woman or girl, and certain physical problems such as feeling lightheaded or dizzy, hair loss, or dry skin. Anorexia is a serious health condition, and in spite of normally being associated to women, it can also affect men. It is usually brought about and associated with other mental ailments, such as depression and bulimia. All of this is something that is discussed in detail in 4st7lbs, the song we'll talk about today. A very disturbing song about a person's journey through this terrifying illness. The year is 1994, and the Manic Street Preachers were one of the top bands in all of Europe. Generation Terrorist's ecstatic political rock was as much of a successful debut as any British band's debut in the 90s, while their sophomore, Gold Against the Soul, veered more towards melancholic and personal songs. But behind the success and fame brought on by the first two records lied mostly pain for rhythmic guitarist and lyricist Richey Edwards. Edwards had suffered from severe depression and used to self-harm as a way of coping with his pain, usually by putting out cigarettes on his arms and cutting himself. He is quoted in a BBC article, which will be in the description below, having stated the following, and I quote, "When I cut myself, I feel so much better. All the little things that might have annoyed me suddenly seem so trivial because I'm concentrating on the pain. I'm not a person who can scream and shout, so this is my only outlet. It's all done very logically." He usually suffered from insomnia and often drank himself to sleep. His alcohol consumption, however, wasn't restricted to those times, since Edwards also stated, I'm the sort of person who wakes up in the morning and needs to pour a bottle down my throat. In 1994, his behavior, according to bassist Nicky Wire, had escalated to a point where everybody got a bit frightened. His mental state started really to deteriorate during the recording of the Manic's third record, The Holy Bible, with Edwards learning of the suicide of a close friend from university. He also started to exhibit symptoms of anorexia this year. In the month of July, he was taken to the hospital due to severely cutting himself at home, being transported to the Whitchurch Psychiatric Hospital in Cardiff. His weight upon arrival at the hospital? Just 6 stone, or 38 kilos. The Manics' albums, up to this point, were lyrically mostly a joint effort between Richey Edwards and Nicky Wire, while vocalist and lead guitarist James Dean Bradfield and drummer Sean Moore handled the instrumentation. But lyrically, the Holy Bible was an exception to this, being Edwards' magnum opus. Around 70 to 75% of the record's lyrics were written by Edwards, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out that these were probably not the happiest of lyrics. Prostitution, consumerism, freedom of speech, the Holocaust, serial killers, the death penalty, fascism, and of course, anorexia were all themes talked about in the record. Indeed, it is the bleakest the Manics have ever gotten. But even amongst all these tracks, there is one that stands out in a horrifying fashion, and that inspired this whole video. That track is 4st7lbs, and it tackles headfirst what dealing with anorexia is like. Four Stone 7 Pounds musically starts off as a very dissonant track, as one can expect from this type of song, with a pulsating and loud bass taking center stage during the verse. The pre-chorus is then divided into 2 small stages. The first one is a small march that lasts only for a couple of verses, interspersed with a few loose chords, while the second one, lasting only for 1 verse, returns to a normal beat with a picked chord, before we arrive at the chorus, the catchiest part of the whole song by far, although far from a happy affair still. We then go back to the verse and repeat the cycle a second time, before heading to the second part of the song, that works as an extended outro. This is the most unsettling portion of this effort, sonically almost sounding like a dirge of sorts, and it fits the lyrical content of this part tremendously well, as we'll see in a bit. Now, this song instrumentally is dark, but it's not really that disturbing. No. The reason why this track is as dark as it is really comes down to Edwards' lyrics. And, oh my, this is one of the darkest sets of lyrics that I've ever heard. No question. So let's take a look at it. But before, there is still another person that we need to talk about, that is very important to the story told by this song. I also need to give you guys a final warning, because things will only get worse going forward. So, if you're not in the right frame of mind, I suggest you really stop watching this video and go watch another one of my videos or do something else, because things will only get worse. The song actually starts with a voice sample.
I eat too much to die and not enough to stay alive. I'm sitting in the middle waiting.
It's of a documentary that aired in 1994 about Caraline Neville Lister, a woman who had succumbed to her severe anorexia earlier that year, showing how her daily life was a few months before her death at the age of 29. This 40-minute documentary is one of the most disturbing watches I've ever done. And in this documentary, she discusses the physical, sexual, and psychological abuse that she and her siblings received at the hands of their parents, with her mother tormenting them still to that day. There are other things as well, but I don't feel like I have to say them, and I don't want to say them. Not gonna lie, this one got to me. It was one of the hardest watches I've ever done, and I don't advise anyone to watch this. When the actual lyrics written for this song start, Edwards does something interesting. Instead of telling his perspective on anorexia, he writes through the eyes of a girl. No doubt some of his experiences may also have been adapted in this song. I'm not saying that's not the case. It's just that the main character in this narrative is most likely a teenaged girl. We start with the narrator describing that it has been days since the last time they took a piss, probably due to how little food and liquids she has consumed lately. It's also common for sufferers of anorexia to become constipated, according to an article written by Within Health, an online eating disorder treatment team. Quoting them, "Those who have anorexia nervosa often get constipated on a regular basis, as anorexia and constipation are interrelated. Not consuming enough food to pass through the digestive tract results in its contents getting stuck." This line sets the tone for the descriptive nature of this song. Most of these sentences are formulated like this, or have even more descriptive qualities to them. The following line, "cheek sunken and despaired," refers to how a lot of celebrities have sunken cheeks, and that she finally has those as well. Afterwards, we have the first mention of the narrator's weight, 6 stone or 38 kilos, which makes the narrator consider herself gorgeous, which is incredibly disturbing due to the nature of the story being told. This is also the only weight mentioned in this song that Richey Edwards stated to have had in his life. In an interview he gave to Villa 65 Dutch Radio in 1994, he states that, "In terms of anorexia, I was never severely underweight. I mean, there's a song on the album called 4'7lbs. I was never 4 stone 7 pounds. The skinniest I've ever got is 6 stone, just under 6 stone." After a verse where the narrator states that she's lost her only remaining home, which can be interpreted as losing her body, we enter a descent into a toxic mindset with the last few lines of the first verse. "See my third rib appear. A week later, all my flesh disappears. Stretch it taut, cling film on bone. I'm getting better." She practically stops eating altogether, so her third rib appears. After a week of this behavior, all her flesh disappears from her body as she becomes skeletal. She tries on small-sized clothes that, because she's so skinny, are basically wrapped on her bones. And among this nightmarish scenario, what does she think? I'm getting better. She still believes, after all of this, that this is the correct course of action. One of the most well-known facets of anorexia is the delusion that the person is better off losing all this weight. And in this song, this mindset is dissected in a disturbingly believable fashion. Afterwards, we enter the bridge of the song for the first time. And in here, quite a few people are mentioned. First, we got the lyric, "Karen says I've reached my target weight." And when researching this line, I found two possible picks for who Karen might be. The one most people come to a consensus on is Karen Grzanovich, hope I'm not getting that name wrong, who was a satirical author who wrote for the comedy sections of Sky magazine in the 90s. If she is the person this song refers to, then this could be seen as satire, since she is well and truly far beyond what anyone should consider as target weight. The other person that I found that could be the Karen in this line is Karen Carpenter, member of the musical group The Carpenters, who had died in 1983 due to consequences of suffering from anorexia. If she was indeed the Karen that Edwards thought of when writing this song, then this line can be seen as more sympathetic, in a sense representing the small part of the narrator's mind that knows she is making a huge mistake and should stop as soon as possible. Ultimately, I don't know which one of these two people the song is actually mentioning, although I'm inclined to the first choice, due to it simply being the more toxic one, which seems to be the approach that this song takes. Following this verse, we have references to Kate Moss, Kristen McMenamy, and Emma Balfour, saying that they know it's fake because they know the narrator wants to go further, and that no target weight has been reached. Diet is not a big enough word for the narrator, because no diet was enough to satisfy her, and so she thinks it is better to simply not eat. We then finish this bridge with the narrator stating that she wants to be so skinny that she rots from view, because she wants to disappear, a consequence of the self-hatred she has, which becomes much clearer in the chorus that follows. She wants to walk in the snow, not leaving a footprint. Snow is often seen as a metaphor for pureness, so she doesn't want to leave a footprint because she would only taint the snow, like she taints everything around her, because that is the idea that she has of herself. Right now, we can see she's in a dire situation, but it's still salvageable. Unfortunately, she's set on losing more weight, and so her situation is only going to get worse. This is confirmed in the next verse of the song. She's still incredibly thin, and her stomach has collapsed, which obviously is an incredibly bad scenario, made even worse by the fact that she says at 5 so casually, which makes us believe that this is not the first time it has happened. She then states that her sex is gone, maybe indicating that her period has been absent for a while, which is a common occurrence in anorexia. The verse, "May I bud and never flower," that comes up a bit later, is also a reflection of this. We then see that the girl has reached the weight of 5 stone 2 pounds, which is around 32 kilos. The narrator is entering life-threatening territory, and she's not thinking of going back. Her vision starts to get blurry because she is starting to get dizzy from being malnourished, which, like we saw in the first part of the video, is a symptom of anorexia. This is quite a hurdle for any person, but the narrator stays focused on getting even thinner by looking at her ribs and seeing how much she's quote-unquote achieved in terms of losing weight. Due to the low levels of body fat she has, she also feels constantly cold, which makes her hands tremble uncontrollably. We then enter the second bridge of the song, which starts with her mother trying to force-feed her, while only eating one Revita, which is a British brand of rye crisp bread, indicating that her mother is probably not a great role model when it comes to a healthy intake of food, which can hinder the relationship her daughter has with food. In more extreme scenarios, this can even come from downright abuse involving food. Her father simply remarks, "That's the way you're built," being a bit dismissive and not too concerned with her state. The bridge ends with the narrator in a delusional fashion, considering her weight loss to be akin to a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, probably seeing her body as a cocoon and weight loss as a process of shedding it. Although, at this point, she's beginning to be so far gone that she might be considering death as this process instead, with the cocoon being her body that is left behind. We then go back to the chorus before entering the most heart-wrenching set of lyrics I've seen in a long time. Man, this outro is something else. It starts off with the girl looking at pictures of Kate Moss and Kristen McManamy for a sort of encouragement in losing her final pounds, and also looking towards the Kit Kat. And she looks at the Kit Kat, trying to keep some self-control over the situation. There is no going back now. She's too weak to do anything about her situation anymore. Even ending her own misery is out of the question. A very nihilistic sentiment is then presented in the line, "Choice is skeletal in everybody's life," in a sense saying that sooner or later everyone dies and becomes a skeleton. Skeleton also being a metaphor for her current physical appearance. Following this appears to be a very interesting sentence. "I choose my choice, I starve to frenzy." Anorexia sufferers have the need to control their bodies, hence acting very defensive when someone tries to intervene in their situation. Richey Edwards was no different. In a book, a version of Reason, The Search for Richey Edwards by Rob Jovanovich, he is quoted in saying, "The lowest I got down to is just under 6 stone. That was my 3rd year at university. That was the skinniest I ever got during my finals. But again, that was all about control. When it came for me to do my finals, I suddenly realized that I can't go in to do my finals pissed. So the way for me to gain control was cutting myself a little bit and not eating very much." That's what was important for the narrator and for Edwards, the control of the situations they're in. And to do that, they feel like they need to control their own body. Then we have more lines discussing her physical state. When a person starves for a long time, they stop feeling hungry and they start feeling sick. And that's what's happening. She has no strength to support herself, so her legs start to bend, comparing herself to Dame Leslie Lawson, also known as Twiggy, who was a very thin model in the 60s. She's come to a point where she's on the verge of dying, which she describes as moving into a higher plateau. And so, it doesn't concern her how horrific her body looks. And terms like self-worth and self-esteem don't even cross her mind. Not only does she not care about how poorly she's feeling, she is actually proud of her commitment into getting to the state that she's at. She's delusional until the very end, seeing the treatment she's receiving from the nurses, doctors, or even her family as pampering, since they are simply fat scum who don't recognize her achievement. At the end of the song, she finally feels happy as she reaches 4 stone 7 pounds, the weight at which death is thought to be medically unavoidable for people who suffer from anorexia. She feels elated and finally thinks of herself as beautiful. validating to her all the self-abuse and torment she's put herself through. She finally succumbs to her illness, dying while looking into her belly button, to where her stomach once was, not looking away, until her stare becomes empty and devoid of life. Less than a year after the Holy Bible came out, in February 1st, 1995, Richey James Edwards disappeared and was never found again. He was eventually presumed dead 13 years later. He was 27 at the time of his disappearance. The other members of the Manic Street Preachers considered disbanding, but after receiving the blessing of Edwards' family, they decided to carry on. An extra microphone is set up at every gig that the Manic Street Preachers play up to this day in honor of Richey Edwards. Okay, honestly, I'm not even sure how I should end this. Of course, for me to have done this video, I already knew this song was disturbing. I already thought of it as so. But it came to a point where I genuinely felt bad for a couple of days while doing this research. I even thought of stopping this video altogether because it was getting a bit too much, especially with the documentary and all of the story involving Richey Edwards and Caraline Neville. But I carried on because I want to show whoever watches my videos every kind of music that I find interesting. And some songs that I find interesting are not meant to be enjoyed, but experienced, as long as you are in the right frame of mind, of course. And this is a song that I find to be essential to understand a bit more of this terrible illness. Anyway, if you're still here after all this time, all I can say is thank you for watching this wreck of a video with me. And I sincerely hope that you at least found it to be just a bit interesting. And if you're feeling down, it's just like Wendigoon says, sometimes you have to remember that just like there are horrible and messed up illnesses like anorexia, there is also a lot of beauty in the world. So sometimes it is necessary to get your mind out of these stories and remind yourself of all the gifts life can offer you. Also, if you or someone you know suffers from anorexia, remember that there are ways to beat this, and that support for this terrible condition has evolved a lot over the last 30 years. There is even a charity named after Caraline Neville, having been created after her death by a friend of hers. I'll also list some charities in the description below, and some helpful information that you might find useful. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it is worth it. You have to be courageous and do this for your own sake. Learn from the stories of Richey and of Caraline. It is worth helping yourself out, because you deserve it, and don't let any past event or any person tell you otherwise, because they are wrong. You are worth it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later on in another video.